Hello, everyone.
Hey there, guys.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of.
But you should have.
And now you will.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to thank everybody. We mentioned this on our Instagram, if you follow us there, that we did get second place.
We did on the Islanders Best of 2020.
Yeah, so thank you for everybody in the region who voted. And if you're not from here and you couldn't vote, we thank you for listening anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And congratulations to Spokecast. They are a local podcast that focuses on local people. So it makes sense that people would vote for the thing that is definitely local.
Yeah, congrats to you guys.
What now?
We both just stared at each other. What the fuck?
How about that coronavirus, huh?
I don't want to talk about that.
I know, right? I don't know if you guys at home are feeling this way, but I have reached maximum saturation on COVID-19 stuff.
Yeah, there's just only so much, and also just all the extra random bullshit that's coming along with it. It's like all I'm caring about is like what we're supposed to do. What's the latest on how we can help, flatten the curve.
Yes.
All I care about.
And it is very important, listeners at home, to flatten the curve.
Mm-hmm.
We were just discussing our next door neighbors, the Idahoans, and their failure to help flatten the curve.
Idaho, you suck.
Idaho, get your shit together. So we were just talking about, so we live very close to the Idaho border. So for those of you who are not from Spokane and you don't exactly know where it is, we are 20 minutes
A good 20 minutes away
from the Idaho border.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that a lot of people live in Idaho and work in Washington, or they live in Washington and they go play in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how it is. We're very close together. The people who live in Idaho and work in Washington really irritate the hell out of me because they get the benefit of higher wages and don't pay a single fucking bit of taxes.
Yeah.
That's hard for me because I do see some of my coworkers who are like that causing issues.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, Idaho has basically not done anything. They haven't even closed schools. They've left it up to individual school districts to decide. So there have been closures for like a week or two or whatever, but their restaurants, their bars, their movie theaters, their hotels, their amusement parks, all that shit is still open. And so people from our area who are fucking dumb are going over to Idaho so they can have a relaxing weekend and like go out to eat.
No.
That
is so irresponsible.
And you're going to see those numbers climb because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see those spring breakers in Florida?
Yeah. Beach full of hundreds of people.
And people from all over who went there for spring. I mean, I had this plan for like 2 months. So like, I just didn't want to cancel it. I mean, we're healthy and young. It's not going to bother us. Hey, knock, knock.
Who's there?
It's not about you. It's about who you might infect. It's about the rest of the community. And so it's really opening my eyes, honestly, to see the people in my own life who are fucking selfish as shit.
Yeah.
I have an autoimmune disease. Even though I'm young, I have had lung issues in the past. I have an inhaler. I have an autoimmune disease. I've had pneumonia before. So I already have damaged lungs. So if I were to get that truly and it got bad, I could die.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could be totally fine because I'm still only 36. Who knows? It's a gamble.
It is a gamble.
But I would rather not gamble. And I'd rather not gamble on the life of my next door neighbor. We have an elderly couple next door. And I don't want to kill them.
Yeah.
I don't want to make them sick. And it's very hard to see people do these things that like defy logic.
Yeah. Well, we definitely live in a generation now where if it's not kicking down your front door personally, it's not going to affect them.
Right.
Yeah. It's not, I've seen a lot of people who've, I've done a little joke meme here or there, but some people who seriously like every day, multiple times a day are laughing at this. And I don't think it's funny. in that way.
I think it's okay to
be lighthearted.
To find humor in a dark time. Like, I think it's important and necessary.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference between finding humor in a dark moment versus laughing away at something, laughing it off.
I think that's where I was headed with that, was that they're laughing it away to the point where they really don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And they really are going to defy logical reasoning, because they're just like, oh, it's just this weird thing. It's just this weird thing. And it's funny that I've seen some people I know personally even, who were doing that for the first week. And then all of a sudden now it's very serious and we all need to come together and please be responsible. And it's like, really? Because you were just like out for St. Patrick's Day and now you're going to fucking stay home? What?
Yeah, I have also seen that happen. I actually read a story in the New York Times talk about some caucasity.
Do
I
tell.
read this story in the Times this week about this Louisiana couple who had, like, they thought this was silly, everything was overblown, and everyone in their little conservative, they live in like a suburb outside of New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody felt the same way and was like, this is just a hoax to try to bring down Trump and all of this weird ass shit that's just, by the way, guys, once again, I'm going to remind you, it's not about you, because this fucking virus is killing people all over the world.
It's killing both sides. And it's not really just going for the Dems or the Republicans.
And it's like, nobody in fucking Thailand gives a shit about who is in our presidency right now.
Mm-hmm.
Or in Italy, for Christ's sake, where they're being ravaged by this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about America.
Yeah.
So this couple is like doing their thing. They go to like a Mardi Gras celebration. And then a couple of days later, the husband falls ill.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets hospitalized. And even as of the writing of that article, she'd not been able to visit him. He's not breathing on his own.
Oh, geez.
And it's not looking good.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually put up a Facebook post that was like, hey, everyone. I know you guys weren't taking it seriously, and I'm seeing a lot of my friends post this stuff that's like really not serious, and I'm usually a very private person, but I want to tell you that, I don't know, I can't remember his name. Let's just say it's John. That John has it. He's positive. He's in the hospital. He hasn't seen her. We're in isolation. My son and I are. We can't see him. He's on a ventilator. Like, this is real, and it could happen to any of you, and I need you to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly her entire community just fucking woke up, and they were like, oh my God, I know somebody who has it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's no longer a hoax.
It makes it real. Yeah.
And pretty soon, if we don't do these like flattening the curve measures, every one of us is going to, quote, know someone. Mm-hmm. And it will come home to roost. And that's unfortunate. And those spring breakers, some of them are sick now.
Yeah. Guess they'll learn the hard way.
Yeah, I just saw it posted, a news article posted this morning about how some of these spring breakers who were in Florida in the last week have tested positive.
Oof.
And I'm like, well, that is what happens, isn't it?
There you go.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
With my shocked face. In any case,
yeah.
Let's stop talking about COVID-19 and talk about amazing women.
Okay, so you got the long one. Let's go for it.
Okay, so I do believe you're going to know who this is.
Alrighty. Challenge accepted.
I'm nervous about it. I hope you don't. But I think you might.
Okay.
Are you ready?
All right.
I'm going to tell you the story of Miriam Makeba.
Well, I know that last name. Isn't it Makeba?
On the videos, they say Makeba.
Okay. All right. Keep going.
She is known as Mama Africa, a South African singer, activist, and the first African to win a Grammy.
Maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Keep going. So far, no. Just the last name sounds familiar.
So Zenzile Miriam Makeba was born on March 4th, 1932 in Johannesburg, South Africa, to a Swazi mother named Christina and a Xhosa father named Caswell. Now, Xhosa is Xhosa, and I'm pronouncing it in the English version. Mm-hmm. It is not that. It is a click language. So I tried and tried and tried. The closest I could get is Xhosa. That's it. I couldn't do it. But that's me trying, and I really did try. I fell down the rabbit hole of click YouTube videos, and I could not.
You couldn't do it?
Couldn't do it. So Xhosa it is. Her family lived in a black township called Prospect, and her mother worked as a sangoma, which was a traditional healer in the Swazi traditions. And she also earned her money working as a domestic worker in white houses. And her father was a teacher, and he happened to be also a very talented piano player. And I know I read somewhere that she had 6 siblings, I think.
Whoa.
But I couldn't verify where I found that when I went back to look at that. So there were quite a few kids, and they were all like, I know one of her brothers was super into music and had lots of records from like Ella Fitzgerald and stuff like that. So she had been exposed to a lot of music. When her mother was pregnant with Miriam and birthed Miriam, it was an extremely difficult pregnancy, and it almost killed her mother.
Yikes.
So Miriam's first name that was given to her was Nzile. And that was because her grandmother would often mutter under her breath, like, Uzenzile, which meant you brought this on yourself.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Way to like stamp that on someone's life forever.
And then she was like, in reference to her daughter, Christina, like, I can't believe you're having this baby situation.
Yikes.
So when Miriam was less than a month old, her mother was arrested for brewing beer.
Whoa.
And selling it, which was illegal. She was making this like traditional Swazi beer that was made from cornmeal.
Was alcohol illegal at that time?
No, I think you just weren't allowed to like bootleg it.
Okay. Just not legal.
And so she was helping pay the bills, and she got arrested for it. And that meant that Miriam's first 6 months of life were spent in jail with her mother.
Oh, wow.
She was only 18 days old when her mom was
so she
arrested.
couldn't be taken away.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
So Miriam grew up singing in her church at this all-black school that she attended. She was baptized Protestant, so she went to like a Christian school. She learned how to sing in English before she actually understood the language. She could sing the words in it, but didn't know what she was singing.
Nice.
But she could sing in English, in Xhosa, in Sotho, and in Zulu. So she's very talented.
Yeah.
When she was pretty young, her family moved from their place in South Johannesburg over to a place called Transvaal. And I think her father had gotten a new job there, which is why they were moving. But they weren't there long in Transvaal before her father died.
Oh.
And her mom couldn't afford to take care of their entire home by herself. So at the age of 6, Miriam went to work. And she was working in homes of white people, like cleaning and stuff like that. In 1949, when Miriam was just 17 years old, she married a police officer in training named James Kube. The couple had a child in 1950 when she was 19. Or 18,
it's really
I
young.
guess.
Really
and
young.
that was her one and only daughter named Bonji. But the marriage was awful. Miriam later said that James was abusive physically to them. And she needed to get out of that life, but she didn't know how. It was not really a thing you could do.
That's a story that's been repeated so many times, even now.
I mean, especially in 1950.
Yeah. What is she going to do?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Miriam was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Geez, how old is she?
She's like 20.
That is so young.
Yeah, it's really young.
I didn't know you could get it that young. Okay.
I mean, it's very rare. I knew you could, but because of that, James left them.
What a dick.
I know. And I was just thinking about that because last week we talked about some people stick around, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, some people stick around and some people don't.
Yeah, he's a don't.
And he's a don't. And it was like, probably for the best, though.
Yeah, you were being an asshole anyway.
So luckily, though, she survived this bout of cancer with the help of her Sangoma mother.
Oh, that's awesome.
Who was doing lots of traditional healing and herbs and stuff like that. So Miriam started her actual career in singing when she joined a group called the Cuban Brothers. So that was funny because they're not Cuban. That was her cousin's all-male South African singing group. And they sang covers of popular American songs. That was basically their entire repertoire.
I wonder if they called themselves Cubans to pass as something else to be able to perform.
They only performed in South Africa. So
remember the Aborigine group?
Yeah,
the girl
that's
group?
right.
They would say that they were black, or that they were American. To be able to play in clubs, or I think they even said they were Mexican or something like that.
So they were called the Cuban Brothers. She played with them quite a bit. That was her cousin's group. But then she joined a different all-male group called the Manhattan Brothers. And they did covers as well, but they also sang traditional South African songs. And Miriam was really into that. She'd like grown up singing all of these really traditional songs. So at 21, this is when she decides to join the Manhattan Brothers. But the first time that they go abroad, they don't bring Miriam with them. It didn't really go into detail as to why. I don't know if they didn't think traveling with a woman would be appropriate or what.
Or her child, maybe?
Yeah, maybe it's because she had a baby, but they decided not to have her go. So while she stayed behind, she decided to join an all-female group, which at the time I believe was called the Sunbeams, but they later were known as the Skylarks. That's what they were famously known as. And they were a jazz group and incorporated South African sounds and songs and stuff like that. And they got signed to an actual record company called the Galatone Records. And they ended up, in the course of the time that she was with them, recording more than 100 songs together.
That's a lot of music.
It's a lot. And they would release these albums and they would do modestly okay. So the next time that the Manhattan Brothers decided to go on tour, Miriam joined them the second time. So that's why I was like not sure what was going on the first one.
Maybe it was money.
Maybe.
Too.
As soon as she got to tour, she was like, oh my God, the world. Because she, for the first time, had left South Africa. I mean, I don't even know that she had traveled very far in South Africa itself. So she's traveling around the continent of Africa and seeing all these different African cultures. And she was like, this is amazing. But these other African other African countries that she would visit, they didn't have apartheid. Because they didn't have white people.
Yeah.
They didn't have white minority governments like South Africa did. And apartheid as a system was implemented in 1948 when Miriam, was 15. So she was old enough to understand it. And in case, I think most of us really understand what apartheid is because we've all heard about it. Basically, you take Jim Crow and up it a lot.
Yeah.
And it was really awful, and it was extremely discriminatory and violent at times, and very much meant to uphold white people as a ruling race. So she sees what it's like to live in an African country that doesn't have apartheid and is like, what the fuck is wrong with us?
Yeah.
You know, like we've got to stop this kind of thing. So that, just keep that in the back of your mind. Like that is sort of a driving force in her life. So in 1959, that's like the year she gets put on the map in South Africa as a musician. She starred as the lead female role in a musical called King Kong, which a lot of people just talked about it like, oh, she was in King Kong. So I thought it was the movie about the monster, but it wasn't.
That was my first thought.
I know. I just think sometimes I'm like, I just assume I know something I don't. It was actually a musical about a very famous South African boxer who had killed his lover and died in prison.
Oh.
So she played like the main female role in that, and it toured around and it even played in mixed race audiences, which I thought was really crazy because apartheid was the law of the land. But they got around it by doing stuff at universities, it said.
Oh, so it was more, okay.
So I wondered if there were different rules in different spaces. But in any case, it raised her profile among both white and black audiences in South Africa. And that same year, so it was actually, she was that in 1959. So she's in this great musical, gets a lot of recognition. That year, she gets invited to go to the Venice Film Festival in Italy.
That's really cool.
Right? And the reason that she was asked to go to this is because 2 years prior to that, she had participated in a film called Come Back Africa, which was like part documentary, part fictional film. And she had sang some traditional songs in it and had been vocal about her dislike of apartheid. So that film had been chosen to be at the Venice Film Festival.
It was at the festival?
And so it's 1959, 2 years after it was filmed, that it's appearing on the film festival circuit. So she was flown to London, And while she was in London, she meets an American singer named Harry Belafonte.
My God.
And we've talked about him before too.
Yeah.
So she meets him and she goes to Venice. And the film ends up winning the Critics' Choice Award.
Oh.
And the film itself was very critical of the white minority-ruled South African government. And because of that criticism in the film and its success meant that there were a lot of eyes in the international community now looking at apartheid.
That's kind of a goal right there, isn't it? Is to draw attention to what's going on.
Exactly. That was the goal of the film. And the film was done basically in secret. The filmmaker himself got private backing, didn't have any permits because he didn't want the government to know what he was doing.
Wow.
So everyone who participated in the film that was named was then at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so South Africa was like, fuck you, Miriam, and basically blacklisted her. And so she couldn't safely return home.
Oh, whoa.
So when she's hanging out with Harry Belafonte, he's like, I think you're legit. I think you could be a star. I think you'd be huge in the United States. Why don't you come to the US with me? And he really wanted to be her mentor and sort of guide her through the system in America.
That would probably be her safest bet, too, because if she's blacklisted and she does go home, she could be arrested.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like she could have definitely been put in prison.
Yeah.
So she decides to do what Harry Belafonte wants. And she's like, absolutely, let's go. But before she leaves London, she meets and marries her second husband. His name was Sonny Pillay. He was also a South African singer, but he was actually Indian. I think his family was Indian, but they lived in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But they lasted just a few months and divorced. So husband 2 down. So she goes to the United States, and Harry actually got her a passport to be able to come to the U.S. And he booked her immediately on the Steve Allen Show, which was a very popular show at the time with more than 60 million viewers. So immediately right out the gate, she has a huge platform. And he also got her on stage at the Village Vanguard in New York. And that's when she met Miles Davis and Duke Ellington.
Wow.
And she'd listen to Duke Ellington's records when she was a kid.
I would shit myself.
Right. Just incredible. And she ended up moving to the Greenwich Village area and part of the time also lived in Harlem. And she ended up rubbing elbows with the most famous people of the time, including Frank Sinatra and Nina Simone.
Wow.
So in
Love Nina Simone.
Yeah, oh, well.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
I also love Nina Simone. I don't know how you could not. She's incredible. So in 1960, a protest erupts in Miriam's hometown of Transvaal in South Africa. And it was because there had been a newly implemented law called the Pass Laws, which said that in order to travel anywhere, you had to have a certain pass, and they were only being granted to certain kinds of people. Let's take a wild guess. And it meant that basically Black Africans were just not even allowed to go anywhere. And that was a problem. So the protesters gathered together and they were crowded outside of a police station. And there's a little bit of controversy about what exactly took place. But the fact of the matter is the police opened fire on the crowd and a lot of people were shot in the back as they were fleeing.
Jeez.
The police killed 249 people.
Oh my God.
Including 29 children.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That is terrible.
And that was, just FYI, that is called the Sharpeville Massacre. So that moment in time, those 249 people were killed. Of those, 2 of them were Miriam's family members.
Oh, wow.
And shortly after that happened, within days or maybe even a week, her mom dies.
Oh, no.
So she's like, fuck, I need to get home.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to attend to her mother's funeral, but also wants to check in on her family because this is a crazy, wild time. It's scary. It's violent. 2 of her family members have been killed. She's got to go check in on them. And her daughter is there.
Oh.
Her daughter is supposed to be with her mom, but now her mom is dead. So she went to the embassy in New York to apply for permission to return to South Africa. And this is what happened. The man at the desk took my passport. He did not speak to me. He took a rubber stamp and slammed it down. Then he walked away. I picked up my passport. It was stamped invalid. They have done it, I told myself. They have exiled me. I am not permitted to go home. Not now, maybe not ever. My family, my home, everything that has gone into the making of myself, gone.
Mm-hmm. And was she never able to go back home?
That's part of her whole journey. So, very long time. But she's obviously desperate to get Bonji to America to be with her, and was able to, through the help of a lot of well-connected people, she was able to get Bonji to the United States in 1960.
Oh, that's good.
So after this happens, though, Miriam's entire sort of world has shifted. You know, apartheid had always been on her mind as something that was unjust and terrible. But her music had been, prior to that, pretty apolitical. It was just sort of like fun and happy, cool music. But after this, she started to use her popularity to bring attention to the injustices of apartheid. And so a lot of people felt like this was the moment her music shifted to being political. But she really hated that characterization. And so I want her to talk about why she says her music wasn't political.
Okay.
Well, I always feel that even though one is an artist, that we are first human beings and we live in the same world as any other person, so that we as artists should never close our eyes to what is happening around us. Therefore, coming from South Africa, naturally, my life was affected by my environment there. And the songs that I sing are just about my everyday life. And the things I say are those things that have affected my life. The message I'm trying to give to my audience is not one. I am just trying to make them understand me as a person and understand my country and my people.
I mean, that makes sense. It's not, how do I word this? It's not some little agenda she's trying to push. She's just trying to share herself and her story.
Yeah, I think it's the definition of saying the personal is political. Her personal experiences growing up in South Africa are going to have to confront apartheid because that was her reality. You can't separate the two. So she was really adamant about being like, my songs are political because that's what my life was. And I really thought that was a great way to approach it.
That's honest too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So she was signed to RCA Records here in the United States and released her first solo album called Miriam Makeba. One of her famous hits off of that first record, I cannot say it in Xhosa, but it's called the Click Song in English. They just called it the Click Song.
Yeah.
It was a traditional love song. And right out of the gates, critics really loved her. In fact, Time magazine called her, quote, the most exciting new singing talent in years. And Newsweek compared her to Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra.
Oh, wow.
However, the album wasn't very successful financially, and RCA decided to drop her from the label, but not for long, because for whatever reason, in pop culture, Africa and African stuff became cool in the United States. And they were like, oh, wait, well, we have an African singer. And the first time around, they'd kind of downplayed her Africanness. And so the second time they were like, she's very African. So it was really weird. Like they were definitely profiting off of her identity, which is gross. But I think it suited her better because she really was very proudly South African. And then, of course, she's got Harry Belafonte to help her out. And she went everywhere with him. One of the things that they ended up doing together is that they sang together at the JFK's birthday party at Madison Square Garden in 1962.
Okay.
That's that famous one where Marilyn Monroe sang the breathy happy birthday song. So she was there.
Wow.
Singing to JFK. Belafonte also had lined up some of the best fashion designers in the country to help polish Miriam's look. But she was like, no thanks. she was like, no, I don't feel comfortable in that. I want to wear what I like wearing, which was a lot more traditionally South African.
Mm-hmm.
And she also kept her hair natural. And now, and even then, to some extent, people really saw her, especially Black women saw her as kind of defiant of white beauty standards.
Mm-hmm.
Because prior to someone like her, there hadn't been very many women who were donning traditional or natural hairstyles and traditional clothing and things like that. And so she sort of brought, and it's obviously also the 60s.
Yeah.
Which is when there's this big call for like returning to the roots and understanding where we all come from and things like that. So it really aligned very well. And she ended up becoming like a style icon, specifically for Black women.
In this video, she's dressed amazingly. Her style is very like, you could see that going down a runway today.
Oh yeah, she is epitome of style. Like especially some of these photos and videos that I watched from the 60s and 70s. Just incredible style.
The play on on we want you to be African to a point. You know, we don't want you to be so African that it makes the white people uncomfortable.
Yep.
That's such bullshit. But I understand the artist before her that did do that because they're just trying to make it. You know.
Well, and also, I mean, it really was just the beauty standard, right? Like, if everything you do, every magazine you look at, every television show you watch, is white girls with pretty straight hair, then of course that's what the style is supposed to be. And here's this woman who, one, has short hair.
Yeah,
she doesn't have long hair. Two, she lets it go natural. And three is not about wearing anything that is required of her. And I think she ended up becoming a style icon, actually. And not just for Black women in the United States, but for Black women all over the world. Because she made it acceptable to look how you want to look.
Change the norm.
And I thought this was really interesting. I read this in something, and I didn't include it in my notes because I wasn't going to talk about it. But since we're on this topic, I think it's important that when she was initially finding success in the 50s in South Africa, she was seen as a sex symbol, right? But when she came to the United States, that is not how the media or the press or anyone talked about her.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because she couldn't be attractive, right?
Yeah.
And that is really hard to stomach. But she is obviously very
being
sexy.
Attracted to that, and her being an ethnic person, the fact that they feel uncomfortable with that and that can't even exist in how they're trying to promote her.
It's like they were really interested in her Africanness as an asexual identity.
Yeah.
But if there was any sexuality tied to it, it was too threatening.
Yeah.
And that, anyway, that's a whole other topic, but it is something to know. So Miriam has been now traveling, touring all over the world, going to Europe, Latin America, and elsewhere. The first time she returns to the continent of Africa is in 1962 in support of Kenya's independence from British colonial rule, which is great. She's invited by the Kenyan president to come in and perform. And the next year, so 1963, she is invited to come speak to the United Nations for the first time on South African apartheid. And at this United Nations summit, she is speaking to all the world leaders, right? All at once. And she was urging them to pass economic sanctions against South Africa and commit to an arms embargo, which would mean they wouldn't get any guns or military equipment. And she said, because those guns that they're going to buy from you are going to be used against Black women and children. And so, I mean, it was very strong. It was a big deal because she was, by this point, very well known, sang at JFK's birthday party.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal, right? So as a result, Miriam Makeba's music becomes banned in all of South Africa.
Oh, jeez.
And her citizenship is revoked entirely. She is now a woman with no home.
Yeah.
And this is what she said about this. I always wanted to leave home. I never knew they were going to stop me from coming back. Maybe if I knew, I never would have left. It is kind of painful to be away from everything that you've ever known. Nobody will know the pain of exile until you are in exile.
Mm-hmm.
This had raised her platform specifically among other African nations who were looking to break away from colonial rule. She was seen as like a really great icon who was fighting, using her popularity and stardom for a good cause. So she was actually invited to the first meeting of the Organization of African Unity, and she was the only performer who was invited.
Oh, wow.
So once again, puts her on a world platform. Around this time, Miriam marries her third husband. He is a fellow South African musician that she had met earlier when she was still in South Africa. They had worked together, I think, when she was with the Manhattan Brothers.
Okay.
But his name was Hugh Masekela. This marriage was also short-lived, only about 5 years, but they remained cordial with one another. So her star now is just rising and rising and rising. And in 1964, she releases her second solo album called The World of Miriam Makeba, which peaked at number 86 on the Billboard charts. And in 1966, she won a Grammy for An Evening with Harry Belafonte, making her the first African woman to win a Grammy. And it was weird when I read this. Some places said that meant that she was the first African to win a Grammy. Some places said she was the first Black African to win a Grammy. And then other places said she was the first African Black woman to win a Grammy.
Okay.
I was like, okay.
What is it?
So I think she was the first African to win a Grammy. But again, like the BBC said that she was the first African to win a Grammy, but then like other places said she was the first African Black person.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've run into issues like that before where like 4 different sources say 4 different things.
It was very hard to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
So she is not just involved with anti-apartheid stuff, but she also starts really advocating for Black liberation all across the world and really targets the United States. This is what she said about segregation in the United States. Because again, this is the mid-60s.
Yeah.
So the Civil Rights Act of 1960.
Things are getting hot. Yeah.
Yeah. There wasn't much difference in America from South Africa. It was a country that had abolished slavery, but there was apartheid in its own way. And I want to actually share another clip with you where she really talks about the global issue of discrimination against Black people all across the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is from a talk, I believe, in 1966, but it could be today.
He's always on top. I think if you're Black, you have difficulties everywhere there are white people. And most white people always say that we should not generalize and so on and so forth. And in fact, there are some countries, even take Sweden. In Sweden, people say there's no racial problem there. But it is only because there are not that many Black people in Sweden, so you don't really see it as clearly as you see it in countries like United States or even South Africa. But there is prejudice everywhere. For instance, in Sweden, we were performing there, and my guitarist, who isn't really white, he's Brazilian, and he looks white because he's an albino. But some people approached him on 4 occasions and told him, why does he have to play with guys? And this was in Sweden, where people really often say they have no problem. And take his country, Brazil. We were there last June, and white people in Brazil denied the fact that there were racial problems in Brazil. But it exists. We saw it every day. Everywhere I performed in Brazil, I never saw Black people. I only performed to white people. And they said, well, it's because they can't afford to come here. It's too expensive, which is another form. That is another form of keeping them from coming to where they can enjoy themselves together with white people. They keep them poor.
Well, yeah, everything she said was true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They keep them poor.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I was saying about, like, this was, I think, 1966 when she's saying this. And this is on a Finnish TV show. So she's
Okay.
talking to, Scandinavian folk. And I think, first off, how fucking brave it is to talk about that kind of stuff at that moment in time. And to be very, very direct.
Yeah. Not being apologetic about it or being like, no offense, but it's just a fact because it's a fact in her life.
And you can probably tell from how soft-spoken she is that she's actually a really shy person. Like, she's a great performer and singer on stage, but when she's not on stage, she's pretty reserved and shy. And so for her to go out there and have this platform and talk like she does, it was really quite brave and impressive. So she's becoming more involved in activism in general, not just with apartheid stuff, right? In fact, she performed at benefit concerts for Martin Luther King Jr. She was part of the she performed for the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is one of the major groups that was pushing civil rights. Funny enough, though, later on, she criticized MLK and the SCLC because they had invested in South African companies.
Oh.
She also became active in the political movements like the civil rights movement, but also was active in the Black consciousness and Black power movements. So she was starting to really dabble in these things that were looking at Black pride, which was at the time very radical and, controversial in the United States. And it's around this time that Miriam releases the song Pata Pata in 1967. She'd originally recorded that when she was with the Skylarks, that all-female group. But she re-recorded it and released it in 1967, and that shit took off. It skyrocketed on the charts. It peaked at number 12, but it spent more than 11 weeks on the top 100.
Wow.
So I want to play a clip from Pata Pata just so you can hear her music and see what she's like on stage. Because so far we've only seen her talking about pretty grim stuff.
Yeah.
And she's just very joyful in her music. And this song is an earworm if I've ever heard one. This is an earworm.
Very cool. I always love how African music is just so happy.
Well, a lot of it is, obviously.
Yeah.
But she actually has another song that I think Hugh, her third husband, he had helped write, or maybe he did write it, I can't remember, called the Soweto Blues. And the lyrics to that are heartbreaking. It's all about the Soweto uprising, which ended with a lot of Africans being killed. Anyway, she has some very serious music, but this was her known song. This is like the song everybody knows.
Okay.
So she is like, everybody's talking about her. She's performing on all of these shows. Everybody loves this song. Everybody's buying this song. Everybody's buying her album. And so she's really gotten like her groove on, right? And she's touring in Guinea when she meets a fellow activist named Stokely Carmichael. Have you heard of him?
Mm-mm.
So he was very famous. He had started in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which he and John Lewis, Senator Lewis, were running. But he moved on from SNCC and actually became one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party.
Mm.
And her and Stokely start dating in private, in secret. They're not telling anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But within a year, she marries him and it becomes news. And almost immediately, her status as a rising star is shot down.
Yeah.
It is not good.
Yeah.
Because the Black Panther Party was seen as like these violent thugs. Like American media had portrayed the Black Panther as these
the
like
worst thing in the
violent,
world. Yeah.
terrible terrorist group, basically. And white audiences felt betrayed by her choice to marry a Black Panther leader. And I was like, who are you to be betrayed? Anyway.
Yeah. She doesn't owe you shit.
It's beside the point, but white audiences started like throwing her records away. Her shows started being canceled. She was being blacklisted everywhere she was supposed to play. And then the CIA began following her and they bugged her apartment. The FBI was surveilling her. And when they left to go on their honeymoon to the Bahamas, the US banned her from returning.
What?
So for the second time, Miriam is in exile.
Jeez.
She's not allowed in South Africa. She's not allowed in the United States. So,
Yikes.
so the two of them moved to Guinea. And for the next 15 years, that's where Miriam stayed. Though she did eventually divorce Carmichael. By that point, he had changed his name to Kwame Ture. And they were married for about 10 years. They divorced in 1978. She was performing all over the continent of Africa, except in, of course, South Africa, where she was still banned. But she wasn't making a lot of money. She was playing a lot of small venues, and it was pretty sporadic. In 1985, her daughter Bonji died in a terrible miscarriage childbirth situation.
Oh my gosh. That's like her mother almost.
Yeah.
She had that difficult pregnancy with her even.
I wondered if there was maybe
something
like a genetic issue, you know?
Yeah.
So her daughter died, and Miriam, in her autobiography and her memoir, said that at the time she didn't have enough money to buy her daughter a coffin.
Jeez.
So after her daughter's death, she stuck around in Guinea for a while, but just couldn't stand it. Everywhere she went, it was her daughter's death. And she kind of was like losing her mind about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so she decided to move to somewhere else. And just, I don't know why she chose Brussels, but she moved her and her grandchildren to Brussels. So in 1986, she starts to make a little bit of a comeback because Paul Simon invited her to collaborate on his Graceland project.
Okay.
Which
I
was...
do not like Paul Simon.
I know, and I want to ask you, because I know we've had a discussion about this before, but I'll ask you about this in a minute. So this Graceland project, he had employed a lot of South African musicians and just African musicians in general. And there were some groups, some exile groups, who were really pissed off at him and were picketing his music and his concerts and anybody involved with it because they said that he didn't... It was very hard for me to understand exactly what they were mad about. What it said was that he had not talked with the exile groups. And I think that meant that he hadn't fully understood the complications of which people he was working with and so on and so forth. Miriam, however, was like, I'm behind him 100%. And she said, I don't care what you think. What he's doing is he's highlighting these really important issues to a huge fucking audience. And he's, as a white man, got a huge platform to do that. And this is one of the few ways we can probably get a lot of eyes focused on the fact that apartheid is still the law of the land almost 40 years later. So I know that you've had issues with this particular project, the Graceland project, and Paul Simon in general. And I know we've talked about it before, but I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
I actually had no idea about the situation surrounding that project until my husband told me about it. So for me, it's Paul Simon took the roots of these people. And I think when the not talking to the exile groups is because that experience is theirs and that pain and that message. And for him to take it and commercialize it and make it comfortable for the white people because he's the white man that is selling it. And also one thing that he did was he was taking some of the music that has gone back hundreds of years for these people and he copyrighted it as his own. And they got no money for it.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
And they got in a legal battle because he was like, well, it's my music. And they're like, dude, this has been ours for hundreds of years. It is not yours. So that's my problem. He's done that to Latino people. He's done that to other groups. Los Lobos, he did that to them. invited them to work on a project, and they wrote all this stuff. They wrote all this music, and he took it, copyrighted it, did not pay them.
So boo to Paul Simon.
Boo to Paul Simon. Yeah.
So, God, that sucks.
Yeah.
Fuck him. So, of course, Miriam really wants to go back to South Africa. She's never not wanted to go back home. And there was movement. The political movement was changing. Nelson Mandela, of course, is in prison. But there's a lot of movement internationally to get South Africa to end apartheid. But it was still slow going, and they didn't know if it was really going to happen. So in 1988, she released her memoir, and I want to have her read a little bit out of that memoir about what it feels like to be a stateless South African.
Okay.
And I see myself, a native South African, endowed by nature with a strength much greater than my size, so I might cope with the weight of a racism that crushes my spirit. I look at a bird and I see myself, a native South African, soaring above the injustices of apartheid on wings of pride, the pride of a beautiful people. I look at a stream and I see myself, a native South African, flowing irresistibly over the obstacles until they become smooth and, one day, disappear, flowing from the origin that has been forgotten towards an end that will never be.
She seems so sad.
Doesn't that seem morose?
Yeah.
She just wants to go home.
Yeah.
So just 2 years after this was recorded, in 1990, a major shift in South African politics happened. Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and that was the domino that effectively ended apartheid. And Miriam could, for the first time, return home. After more than 30 years away, she boarded a plane headed to South Africa via her French passport. Because again, she still couldn't get a South African passport because she was no longer South African in the eyes of the government. She said of the trip, "Normally, I sleep during long flights, but when I was returning to my country, I could not sleep a wink." By the time she was able to come home, all of her siblings, except for one, had died. Her remaining brother was the first face she picked out of the crowd when she landed. And after a brief visit to his home, she went directly to her mother's grave, where she spent hours alone, quote, weeping and contemplating in silence. So wherever she went, people, especially kids, chanted Mama Africa. This was a name that she'd sort of been given years prior because she had been touring all across the continent of Africa and had become sort of a beacon of hope to a lot of people, and it had incorporated so many different styles of music from across the continent. And so she had brought African culture to the rest of the world in a really cool way. And during this time in the 90s, Miriam's career starts to have a resurgence. She actually released a collaborative album with Nina Simone, Dizzy Gillespie, and her ex-husband, Hugh Masekela.
What?
Yeah. I was like, I gotta get my hands on that.
Yeah.
She also started appearing in television and films, including a movie about the Soweto uprising that I would love to see. In 1999, she was named a Goodwill Ambassador to the United Nations, and she worked with Nelson Mandela's wife on issues of HIV/AIDS and child soldiers, and she established a center for girls who had been orphaned. Miriam released an album in 2000 called Homeland, which I love, which was nominated for a Grammy, and she appeared in a documentary about how music helped shape the struggle against apartheid in South Africa.
Cool.
Which is really neat. It kind of is full circle.
Yeah.
She announced her retirement in 2005, but kept performing when groups were asking her to do one last performance.
Yeah.
So in 2008, she was 76 when she was invited to sing in Naples, Italy, for a concert in memory of 6 Ghanaian immigrants who'd been shot and killed. They thought it was part of an organized crime syndicate in Italy. So she was doing this benefit concert to raise awareness of these 6 Ghanaian immigrants who'd been murdered. And while singing her most famous song, Pata Pata, she felt ill. She left the stage and collapsed.
Oh.
She died that day on November 10th, 2008 of cardiac arrest.
Oh, geez.
But Miriam forever changed music, not just in South Africa or on the African continent, but across the globe. She basically created the genre of, quote, world music. And through her music, she was able to shed light on the terrible system of apartheid and on racism across the world. She was an icon in every sense of the word. She won Grammys. She won the Polar Music Prize, the Dag Hammarskjöld Peace Prize, and the Otto Hahn Peace Medal. And in 2020, March 5th, 2020, just a couple of days ago, Time magazine started a new project where they realized that their Person of the Year, you know how they have one every year, Person of the Year, which, by the way, up until 1999 had been called Man of the Year, that they had failed to adequately recognize women for more than 70 years. So in an effort to rectify that, they went through each year and created 89 new Time covers. And the 1967 cover featured Zenzile Miriam Makeba, making her one of the most influential women of this 20th century.
Very cool.
Plus her music slaps. I used Wikipedia quite a bit, but also an old archived article from Al Haram Weekly called Miriam Makeba, Mama Africa by Gamal Nkrumah, who was the son of a president who ended up knowing her because she'd sang at his the president's stuff. The obit by Graham Ewins for The Guardian, a profile on South African history online. Her speech that I had up here, that was from the Miriam Makeba from the African Leadership Series, her New York Times obituary, and an interview where she read part of her book on the Afro-Marxist channel.
Very cool. Oof, that was a long one, girl.
I know, girl.
That was amazing, though. That was so much helpful information. I had no idea. I believe, so the reason I recognize her name, it popped into my head. Have you ever heard of the artist Jane? Jain?
No.
She has an album titled Makeba.
Okay, so there are a lot of people who did that. I was reading about that. I couldn't include it all, obviously, because it would have been even longer. But there were a lot of people who've done like songs named after her or whole albums named after her. So she was really influential.
I'll have to play the song. It's actually one of my son's favorite songs.
I'm looking forward to it.
Very cool.
Yeah, well, I really hope you liked Miriam's story. I think she's fascinating. And I was playing Pata Pata, right? And Abby was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, well, it's the person I think I'm going to talk about on the podcast." And she was like, "Well, I like that. What's her name?" And I was like, "Well, Miriam Makeba." And she was like, "Okay, how do you spell that?" And I was like, "What are you doing?" And she added it as a Pandora station. And so all day yesterday, we just listened to the Miriam Makeba station, which played obviously a lot of her stuff, but also a lot of other stuff that was similar.
Yeah.
And it was so fucking fun. Like, we were just dancing around the kitchen. We were making cocktails. We were cooking.
I can't wait to ask Nick if he knows who she is, because he knows.
Oh, he knows
so much about music. If I say that to him, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, blah, 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 blah." I'm like, oh, I want to stump him.
One of these days. Who you got for me?
All right, I kind of have a fun one today.
Oh yeah.
So the reason I was doing this one, me and Nick started a show called Boardwalk Empire.
Oh yeah.
And
I haven't seen it, but I know of it.
It's really good, and I was really interested in. It's about bootlegging.
Yeah.
So if that gives you a hint of anything.
Ooh.
Do you know who Gertrude, Cleo, Lythgoe is?
I do not know her.
She is the Bahama bootlegging queen.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah. So Gertrude was born in Bowling Green, Ohio in 1888. She was the 10th child of an English father and a Scottish mother. 10 kids.
That's a lot of kids. What year is this?
She was born in 1888. So that means...
I guess you needed to run the fields, right? Work those fields, kids.
So Gertrude actually and I'm commenting on this because it was brought up a lot in the information that I went through, that she didn't really look like the rest of her siblings.
Oh.
That she had a darker appearance and that people would comment on it throughout her life. That she looked a little, and I hate this term, but exotic.
Oh.
Yeah, I've been called that and it's not nice. Don't call people that.
Yeah, Miriam was called that a lot too.
Was she?
Mm-hmm. They were like, oh, we love this exotic singer.
Stop it. Yeah. So it just came up so many times. I was like, what does it matter? But
I wonder if there was like a rumor that her mom had like, cheated on her
dad or something like that. When you specifically say one of these does not look like the other.
One of these is not like the other.
So, but it was never confirmed that she was somebody else's. Later on as an adult, people said that she was a lookalike for Cleopatra.
Oh.
And so they gave her the nickname Cleo.
Not a bad nickname.
No, not at all. And not too shabby to look like Cleopatra.
No.
Yeah. She's actually she's quite beautiful. She became orphaned at an early age. Her mother died. And of course, her father was unable to take care of 10 kids by himself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he went and he sent her and her siblings to different orphanages. So they weren't even able to stay together. So like 2 would go here and she went there and then they would. So he had to split them up.
That's shitty.
Luckily, she had an aunt that came and claimed her and took her out of the orphanage. And she was able to be reunited with her father in later years.
But what about her other siblings? Did the aunt not care about those?
It didn't say. I'm figuring because she was the youngest. Like maybe the older ones were able to like get out on their own soon or who knows. She was super savvy. She was really smart and she was a really gifted student. And she actually really loved school. She was a very avid learner. As a young woman, she worked in New York and she worked in California as a stenographer, which that seems like a hard job. Is it?
Well, it's just typing what other people say.
Yeah.
I think
it's a different kind of typing though, isn't it?
Well, like a court stenographer just types whatever is being said.
Yeah.
However, their keyboards aren't the regular size,
their keyboards have words on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I think that would be hard. I mean, it would just be a way of like memorizing, but yeah, I think that would be hard.
I couldn't do it. I know that for a fact. She decided to change jobs though, and she began working for a London liquor exporter. Then prohibition happens.
So that's
she was
fucked.
Like, shit. Her boss really trusts her for some reason. She worked really hard. She was trustworthy. She was smart. She was a good worker. So he trusted her with an opportunity that he came upon to still operate. They would supply liquor to the U.S. through the Bahamas. So, of course, obviously, this is very illegal.
Very illegal.
Mm-hmm. So by using Gertrude, he said that he would be able to get through certain securities. They could go places without suspicion. Mm-hmm. And for the simple fact that she was a woman.
Yeah.
She was pretty charming. She was really funny. She was really direct and quick-witted. So she was really good with people. And she had a way of just kind of getting people to do what she wants. So he was like, I feel like you're perfect for the job. You've got this, wonderful way about you. And also police were like super hesitant to even like frisk, question, or even like arrest women at that time because you're just a girl. You're not doing a bad thing.
And I wonder if it also has something to do with like maybe she was middle class or something like that. Because I think they didn't have a problem doing that to sex workers. The world.
Well, her boss decided to give Gertrude the entire operation. She traveled to Nassau, which is the capital of the Bahamas. She set up the company's wholesale liquor business on Market Street. From the sales to money handling to the entire operation was all of her building and doing.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility. Yeah. It's interesting that he was like, I'm just going to let you take care of this.
She initiated sales transactions with potential buyers and oversaw all the shipments. Later on in her life, there was an interview that she had with a reporter named Winton Wigley, which that is a terrible name.
No, that's a great name. I love it.
Winton Wigley?
I want to make that a character in a book.
Ugh.
Winton Wiggly.
Seems like he's got a bow tie. He's
Yeah.
really short.
He's definitely Weasley, right?
He's a little Weasley.
Definitely.
He sneezes a lot. He's got
Yeah.
allergies.
He's definitely pushing up his glasses.
He loves his mother.
Ooh. He's a serial killer?
Okay, we just created an entire character here.
Yeah, somebody write that character.
Yeah.
No, me. I'll write it.
Oh, she's got it. She's got dibs. So he described her as truly a wonderful personality, a woman of cultivated tastes who can talk books, who travels with the best music in her trunks and shows such artistic taste in dress. I feel like she's all around just a very well-rounded person.
Yeah, it sounds like he was like, she's hot and smart.
And she's got all the great records. I like that he commented that she's got great music.
Yeah,
That's important.
I think
Gotta
so.
have good taste in music. So, of course, she ran into some buyers who were wary of her gender. They were like, oh my God, it's a girl. Does she know what she's doing? She quickly overcame like any skepticism because she actually had some of the best product. So she had really good whiskey, scotch, and rum.
Well, I was going to ask, like, are any of those companies still around? Like, would I recognize the liquors?
That I didn't look up, actually.
I'm curious.
Curious? Well, she had also really good prices, and she was fairly like fun to hang out with and charming. So they were like, she's a cool person.
And we know in the alcohol sale business, that's what the key to selling more liquor is.
Oh, hell yeah. So she worked her way to the top of the business and became someone to vie with in the liquor supplying business. She was getting a big handful of sales, and other competitors were kind of getting upset because she was selling more than them. She became known at this time as the Bahama Queen. And around this time, they kept saying every time a woman would get ousted for being in the bootlegging business or working in a club where they had a speakeasy, they would call her the queen of bootlegging. So it was a term that was tossed around a lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's,
But the Bahama Queen is a specific.
of a very specific, yeah. And she is doing the running as well of going from the Bahamas to the rum runners in New York City. So she's also traveling back and forth.
Well, it's a little girl from a little Ohio town doing this. Kind of crazy, right?
So the reporter I mentioned earlier, Winton,
Winton Wiggly.
he would meet frequently with her in Nassau. So why she was entertaining a reporter, I don't know. I feel like if you're bootlegging, you might not want to get your name out there, but
Yeah, maybe she wanted a little spotlight.
that's from what I gathered, she kind of bragged a little bit, and she was okay with him taking information down, but not necessarily sharing her name, like sharing her story, but not directly who she is. He wrote this about her when someone claimed that she had a bad product. So she said, "Everyone knows that my liquor is the very best. But for some reason or another, this man thought he would criticize it to other people, and he also said something unpleasant about me." Well, I found him in a barbershop with his face lathered, and I walked right up to him and I told him, "I want to talk to you." I fetched him along to my office, and there all I did is I warned him. I told him I'd put a bullet through him for sure as he sat there. He went away mighty quick.
Oh my God. Bitch just threatened to kill him.
I like how she's like, "Come to my office." And she just, "I'm warning you."
I'm going to put a bullet in your head.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, don't cross her.
So Bill McCoy was one of Prohibition's most notorious rum runners. Have you heard that name?
I've heard him. Yeah, I've heard of him.
So he actually would sail with Gertrude on his schooner from Rum Row to the Bahamas and back and forth, and the two became really good friends. She was on board for several weeks with him till her load was sold, and then they would do that over and over and over again. So Bill actually says this about her. "She was a tall, slender girl with black hair, a brain as steady as her own dark eyes, and a history that was nobody's business. She made no secret of her background, but she told an entirely different tale to everyone who asked. She was born in California. She was born in India. She was a gypsy. Members of the rum mob who drew their own conclusions concerning her and then tried to operate accordingly probably will recall the breathtaking fury she could show.
Huh.
And one or two must remember the pistol she would jam up into their ribs to make things very clear.
Wow. She is a character.
An able, thoroughly competent girl she was. Not twittery.
Not twittery.
Not twittery, at whom one could make passes with impunity. She expected others to mind their own business as she attended to hers. She worked at that overtime, and in its course, she nearly ran me ragged.
She is
Ballsy.
She's wild.
For years, she operated successfully out of the Bahamas. She'd been arrested numerous times, but her operation was done so well and clean that the police couldn't ever make anything stick. So she would get arrested. They'd take her picture. She'd get released. Reporters would talk to her. She'd charm the reporters. They'd laugh. She'd go home.
I wonder if it's because she was so, we say forceful, that people didn't want to turn on her. Like, I think the evidence would have been she would have had to have somebody turn her in, right? They'd have to turn on her. And they were probably fucking terrified.
Because she'd probably put a bullet in you.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like she'd have a problem with that.
So one of her last detainments, she was arrested and actually taken to federal court in New Orleans. It's kind of a bigger deal.
In Nolans?
Nolans. So she was charged with smuggling 1,000 cases of whiskey into the city. And for this one, she had actually been somewhere else. She didn't do this one. She had left a shipment in the hands of a subordinate, and he made a shady deal, and he took the money for himself and threw her under the bus. Yeah. She was cleared of those charges, but she was kind of feeling like
now's the time to get out.
Maybe her luck was running out. She left the rum running business in 1925 and decided to write her memoirs. She said she did this to beat a jinx before it gets me.
Smart girl.
Yeah. She reunited with Bill McCoy aboard his boat one last time, and he pleaded for her to stay aboard. And they kind of have this epic confrontation between each other. So she's saying, I'm going to back out. Right now's a good time. I'm doing okay. I'm not going to jail. And he like picks her up and like holds her and says like, I really want to be with you. And please like go home and like take care of some affairs. But please, I will give this up for you. And we can just take my boat and we'll go off into the sunset and we'll just be together.
I was wondering, like, were they in love? Was she in love with him?
They were together. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's kind of that whole like Scarlett O'Hara moment, you know?
Yeah.
And he says like, I'm not going to let you go until you promise me that we're going to be together, please. And so she says, okay, I promise.
Yeah. Everybody's going to say, okay, if you won't,
if you're isolated,
let her go
on a boat. Well,
fucking
she said
weirdo.
she put her arms around his neck and kissed him. And she said, okay, I promise. But she doesn't keep her promise.
Oh,
Yeah.
Shady.
She never saw Bill again. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So actually, Bill was killed in an accident, I believe, maybe 10 to 15 years after that, that moment between them.
Huh.
So they were never able to see each other again.
Wild.
Yeah. So around this time is when Bill dies. She resides in the Parkley house in Miami, Florida. And then she moves on later to for a brief period of time to New York. She had one sister that was a deaf mute. So she decided to take care of her sister.
Wait, so she had a sister who was deaf?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Deaf and mute. She settled in Detroit, Michigan for the next 25 years of her life. She lived in the Tuller Hotel on Grand Circus Park, which, why would you live in a hotel? I guess people used to do that.
Yeah, people did.
Yeah. Was it almost like a duplex and you just rent it? Or
I think it's like, hey, why not have somebody clean up after me every day?
True.
I mean, if you got the money, why not?
Yeah.
But people live in like the Chateau Marmont and stuff in LA.
True. That's
Still.
very true. She decided, she didn't decide. She actually became quite isolated around this time. She really closed herself off from society. She felt like, I believe part of her memoir she had written, she had gone from celebrity status to just nobody.
Yeah, nobody.
And it was really hard for her to adjust to that.
Mm.
While she was in LA, she died on June 24th, 1974. She was 86 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
She lasted a long time.
Yeah, she did. Her reign in the Bahamas appeared in syndicated columns in newspapers and magazines. Her photograph was included in the pages of the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the LA Times. And to this day, she's probably one of the most successful alcohol runner bootleggers in history.
Wow. So how did her picture, I mean, like, okay, so she didn't really ever have charges stick to her, but how did people have like stories and pictures about her and know what she was doing and she didn't get in trouble for it?
I have no idea.
That
They actually
seems
have
wild.
I found one picture of her where she's actually on the boat with Bill McCoy, and they're having dinner on the deck or something like that. And they're just laughing, having a grand old time. And it's like, these are pictures that are documented of them doing the job.
And I could see the documentation existing now, or, you know, just after bootlegging was over, but at the time, that's wild.
With the business though, she was really successful money-wise. So she was being like a socialite. She was going out and she was in New York City. She was in LA. She was at the fancy clubs, rubbing elbows with famous people, things like that.
Interesting.
Because they needed her booze.
Yeah. That's wild. To have her be basically a well-known person who's committing all these crimes. I guess it's similar to like Al Capone. Everybody knew who he was.
Yeah, and he went to jail for tax evasion.
Yeah, because that's all they could get him on.
That's all they could get, yeah. I got most of my information about her from an article titled Gertrude Lythgoe, Fascinating Women of Prohibition by Sally J. Ling. And there's a website that is called Southern Pot Still Pioneers, and it's an article written Spirited Women Who Have Run the World of Spirits.
Oh, I like that title.
Very good. And a piece called Women Bootleggers by Fred Minnick.
Nice.
Yeah, I had never heard of her before, and I just, from watching that show, I was like, I wonder who were the successful female bootleggers? Yeah.
I mean, this one, that character could be the main character in a loosely true television show, like a Netflix show. I would watch the shit out of that.
I would too. I just love how quick-witted she was.
Yeah.
It's like I would love to sit down and have a drink with that lady.
Yeah, she sounds like a lot of fun. Her later years sound real kind of sad and lonely though.
Yeah, she didn't really end on a high note. And I saw a picture of her and Bill and I was like, ooh, you guys look good together.
Maybe she should have just kept up with him.
I wonder why she didn't take it. Well, she also too, she bounced around so much as she was in her later years. I just feel like maybe she just wasn't that person.
Yeah, maybe
just
she didn't want to settle down.
You know, I was on a boat with you for 7 weeks. So we might as well fuck, but it's not like I'm in love.
Oh, that'd be pretty funny too. Well, thank you for sharing that fun story.
Oh, you too. Thank you for yours. That was great.
Yeah. Listen to Miriam Makeba, you guys. It will make your whole life feel better, especially in times like these.
Oh, and one quick note, a thank you. We hit 10,000.
Which has been a goal of ours. So the next one is 15. Help us get there soon.
By the end of the year.
I'm thinking like by May.
All right. I bet you $1.
Okay. We love that you're listening. Thank you for listening. Continue to share with people. We are looking at setting up a Patreon right now because obviously Rita is a server and the businesses are closed here. And so we're going to speed up the process of getting our Patreon set up so that we can maybe help her out a little bit. So if you keep in touch with us online, and we hope to have something set up soon.
All right. We want to thank our editor,
Lucas McIntyre.
And of course, Jennifer Finch from
L7.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.